Hello and welcome to this DW News live stream on the Iran war as fears of a widening conflict grow. I'm Alex Forrest-Whiting.
And I'm Binesh Javed.
Well, it's 4 days since the US and Israel attacked Iran, and there's no sign of the war ending anytime soon. Washington isn't ruling out the possibility of ground troops.
But what is Donald Trump's endgame in Iran? There was no mention of regime change in the priorities that he laid out in a speech on Monday, even though he had previously encouraged Iranians to rise up against the clerical regime. Meanwhile, Iranian strikes across the region are raising questions about how the war might spread.
So we'll be speaking to our correspondent in Beirut, where there have been ongoing attacks, and there still are. And we'll also talk to leading Iran expert, Professor Fawaz Gerges. And of course, we have our very own Middle East analyst, Shani Rouzanis, who will be with us in the studio. But before we talk to you, Shani, let's go to you, Binesh, because you've been looking very closely at what's been happening over the past few hours.
Yes, Alex, and we can explain to our viewers all the strikes that have been happening from US and Israeli side and the retaliatory Iran strikes in different parts in the Middle East through a CENTCOM map, so US military map, and everything that our viewers see in red are all the attacks that by the US and Israel, and we can see there's a lot of concentration of attacks in western Iran. In Tehran also we see a lot. And then we do also see some strikes in Lebanon and also in Iraq and the border of Syria and Iraq. Alex, the US military has between 40,000 to 50,000 service members at several bases and installations across the Middle East. And we can show that with the help of this map by Reuters news agency. Everything that we see in red are the air bases, and the blue are the naval facilities of the US. So all of these bases are in Bahrain, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, and also in other parts. Total, there are 19 locations where there are where US is operating
across the region.
Across
19,
the region,
yeah.
And the largest presence of US troops, around 13,500, is in Kuwait, and it is here in Kuwait where 6 US service members were reportedly killed. The largest base, Al Ubaid Air Base, is in Qatar, and this US base has around 10,000 troops. And
so we're looking at a lot of troops. Then you're talking about 13,000 Kuwait, 10,000 Qatar,
yeah,
and that's just 2 of the bases.
And up to 50,000 US troops across, and also on top of that, 2 US aircraft carriers are in the region, and they combined have 150 fighter jets and about 10,000 personnel. And because of these ongoing attacks, the US has asked all of its citizens to immediately depart from all of these countries. And this tweet, or the picture that we are seeing, is by the Assistant Secretary of State Departments for Consular Affairs. And we see Bahrain, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Lebanon, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, United Arab Emirates, Yemen, Jordan. So they are asking their citizens to immediately depart from these countries because of high-risk situation.
Yeah, so that is a big move. Shani?
Well, in some of the countries, for example, Kuwait, the embassy has been also shut down. We know that, part of the signs that this was an impending attack came already at the end of last week when we saw the Americans calling evacuation for the unnecessary staff from Lebanon and Israel. That was on Friday, but of course from the whole region now it's expanding. We also need to think, when we look at the tally of forces in the region, again, unnecessary staff even in those giant bases has been evicted. So America is trying to minimize the danger to its personnel, because these bases, unlike, for example, in Israel, don't have safe shelters. It's much harder for not necessarily, and definitely not enough for all those thousands of people who are stationed there. So that's already a pre-cautious measure that the Americans have taken before that. And when we talk about the great deployment of forces to the region, there's also many airplanes that are just in Israel, parking in Israeli airports on their way coming and going from Iran. We're talking about 4 daily waves of attack. We need to understand it takes time, even for jets that are very quick, to make the distance between Israel and Iran. That's about 3,000 kilometers. Depends exactly where you want to make it in Iran. So that takes at least a good couple of hours. They would also need tankers. They need to be able to fuel in air. That's actually a very complex operation.
Huge military operation going on.
Correct, and more. I mean, and again, there's different capabilities the Americans have and the Israelis have, but they all are using American airplanes and mostly American. Missile, all sorts of weapons and bombs, most of them, because they're meant to fit these specific planes that are American. So that's the kind of artillery that they're using. Just a hint of what we're talking about. Also, in a sense, it helps the coordination. It helps also understanding each other's ability when it comes to attacking. But also at the same time, when everybody, and that also includes everybody in the Gulf, everybody using the same technology and the same equipment, and with one source, a very strong source when it comes to the Americans. It still also puts some limitations on how fast you can renew and replenish, resources.
And how significant do you think it is that Saudi Arabia, that base in Saudi Arabia was attacked by Iran?
It seems like a very big likelihood. We're seeing where the Iranians are heading. They are very defiant. They're very, they're pushing strong air raids in Israel, going on and off. We're seeing not just in Israel. We've seen attacks also all over the Gulf. We're hearing about shipping vessels that are being set on fire along the Gulf. We're seeing things from Oman, the US, even Oman, and UAE. I mean, the Iranian line is very clear in what they're trying to project. They're trying to project determination and force, and basically saying we are far from being gone and done. We have a lot in us, and we're still, we have planned for this. We are ready for this, and we are going to keep on going. However, it is clear that they're not managing to get as many launches, for example, out as they managed to do in June. The pace has slowed down, and they're in a bit of a bind because many of the launches have already been attacked, and the launchers are basically this is the bottleneck here, because it doesn't matter how many missiles you have. If you don't have enough launchers, that's going to that's going to determine the pace of launching that you can have. And when you launch, even if you have hidden some launchers, not even, we know that Iran has hidden some launchers in mountainous parts of
We have footage also.
Okay, let's see the footage.
But released by the U.S. military, where we can see one of the U.S. attacks on a missile launcher. If we can see those visuals.
Yes. But so what you're saying
when
is
when you use launcher, you're risk exposing it.
Yes.
And this is sort of a kind of a whack-a-mole game where the Americans and Israelis are watching very carefully everything coming out of Iran, trying to locate exactly where it comes from in order to hit that in the next wave.
Here we can see those pictures.
Yeah.
And so this footage has been released by the U.S. military, and it supposedly shows a U.S. strike on an Iranian missile launcher. These are the visuals that we're seeing right now.
So, for example, it seems a bit like a truck. There are mobile launchers that you can actually have more flexibility, because then you can locate it, but you're also more limited with the kind of missiles you can load on such trucks. These are much smaller missiles that they can carry versus the bigger, heavier ones, heavy warheads that would require a different kind of launchers and would have to be put on the ground.
Thank you for that. Let's just move on then to another place that has become a big target in this conflict so far, and that is Lebanon. We know that there have been strikes not just overnight, but they're continuing today. We may even be able to bring a live picture of that. But just explain what is going on in Lebanon and how Lebanon has suddenly been brought into this conflict. We know that there has been an ongoing issue between Lebanon and Israel, but why now is Lebanon and Hezbollah reacting in the way they are?
Well, I think it's good that you've made the distinction at the end between Lebanon and Hezbollah, because what we are hearing from the Lebanese government, or where the majority of the Lebanese people, is different than where Hezbollah is and what we're hearing from Hezbollah. Hezbollah being, of course, a Shiite proxy militia of Iran, very well armed by Iran, fundamentally, ideologically together tied for decades. And they were either obligated or feeling, the need, also from their own self for their own strategy to avenge or to respond the death of Khamenei, and they started launching rockets at Israel. And Israel, if you listen to Israeli media, Israel seems like to have actually only been waiting for this, because Israel is looking for the chance and the opportunity and the reason to basically eradicate Hezbollah, who's been a major threat right at the border, the northern border of Israel. And the difference between Israel being attacked by Hezbollah and Israel being attacked by Iran is mostly and foremost. I mean, there's a different kind of weaponry, mostly now because of Hezbollah's depleted arsenal. But there's far less time for Israel to respond and to defend itself, because we're talking about very few kilometers that these, if it's drones or rockets that need to be, intercepted. Israel has far more time and far more efficient air defense system when it comes to launches coming from Iran. And we are seeing that it started last night. Yesterday was a bit weak, but this morning we're seeing another wave of strong drone and rocket attacks coming from Lebanon. And Israel, in the meantime, has not been silenced at all. It's been, very active in bombing. First of all, asking about 250,000 of Lebanese to evict from the south of Lebanon, but also bombing in the capital, in Beirut, in the Dahya, which is the quarter where is supposed to be it's also the quarter of the Shiite Hezbollah movement in Lebanon.
Yeah, and just to say that these are live pictures that we are seeing now from Beirut and that we were seeing a little bit earlier.
And Shani, so I wanted to ask you, we know that Israel had badly battered Hezbollah, but how come its capacity to attack Israel still is there?
That's a great question. It had a lot. It just basically had a lot. Iran has built Hezbollah as a proxy military force on the border with Israel for many, many decades. A lot of it has been eradicated by Israel, who was very forcefully acting against Hezbollah in the stretch after October 7th. But at the same time, there was a lot, and we also have to keep in mind the Iranians, even after there's been sort of a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah since November 24. In the time since, Iran kept on investing money and sending supplies to Hezbollah, trying to help Hezbollah recover. The need for Iran to have Hezbollah as a functioning military force on the Israeli border is a major part of the defense strategy for Iran.
Thank you very much for that, Shani. I think it's a very good moment for us then to go to Beirut and speak to our bureau chief there, Mohammed Kretet, who is standing by for us. We know, as we've just been talking, that there are these ongoing explosions there. Mohammed, I just wanted to get an idea of what the atmosphere on the ground is like, because I assume it must be quite frightening.
Yeah, signs of desperation are very visible in Beirut since yesterday. Families spend their days looking for apartments for rent in relatively safer areas across Lebanon. Demand is very high on apartment rental and availability is low. So people are still spending their nights on the side roads in public squares. And the schools, the public schools that the government had opened to shelter refugees are already full, so some people are still sleeping in their car. And adding more frustration to the situation in Lebanon are the news coming from Israel suggesting that the Israeli military is deploying additional forces on its northern border and will be advancing and occupying more grounds, more positions in southern Lebanon. You know, the Israeli military is already present in at least 5 positions in southern Lebanon since the war ended in 2024, and had refused to withdraw from these positions with, ongoing hostilities. Israel is still striking Lebanon on a daily basis since then, and Hezbollah has been refusing to disarm. Now, we just received news on witnesses speaking to Reuters saying that the Lebanese military, who's been trying to deploy in these positions that Hezbollah evacuated on the borders with Israel, is now pulling out from at least 7 forward positions on the border with Israel. And that is very frustrating to the Lebanese.
So Lebanese military pulling out from some of those positions, you're saying. Previously, we were just watching some of the pictures there of people in their cars, obviously trying to leave those areas that have come under bombardment. How prepared are hospitals and emergency services this time round compared to previous escalations?
Well, the Lebanese Prime Minister, Nawaf Salam, said that his government had previously prepared plan for emergency situations, especially since the beginning of the war in Iran. And these plans are in place. They have been activated now. But whether these plans are sufficient or not, it would really depend on the developments on the ground here in Lebanon, the scale of the attacks, the Israeli attacks and hostilities, and the duration of this new confrontation between Hezbollah and Israel are main factors that will directly affect the government plan and the capacity of hospitals and emergency services in Lebanon.
Do you think, or critics think, that what Hezbollah is doing, its military decisions, risk dragging Lebanon into a much wider war, particularly when you're talking about the Lebanese military withdrawing from some of those posts on the northern border with Israel?
Well, I think that Lebanon has been already dragged in this war by Hezbollah's decision to join the conflict. I think that all the attempts by the government to persuade Hezbollah to distance itself and Lebanon from the war in Iran failed, just like the attempts to persuade Hezbollah to lay down its weapons and transition into a political party have failed since the war, the confrontation with Israel ended in 2024. I think that as a result for that, the government yesterday designated Hezbollah's military and security activities as illegal, and effectively this means that the party militants and military wing are outlaws, and that the Lebanese armed forces have been given straight and direct orders to stop and confiscate the weapons from this Hezbollah. And this actually has been, widely criticized by Lebanese. I mean, the Hezbollah's decision to enter the war has been widely criticized among Lebanese. Even those who usually support Hezbollah, they see that Lebanon has yet to recover from the confrontation with Israel in 2024, and they now fear that this new round of conflict between Hezbollah and Israel could be even more deadly in Lebanon.
I mean, do you think the government actually has any influence at all over Hezbollah? They've outlawed them, they've said they're illegal, but really what difference does that make? Shani, I don't know if you want to come in on that as well. Or Mohammed, I'd love to hear what you say, but then also Shani's take on that as well. Do you think that the government really has any influence at all over Hezbollah?
I mean, so far, the government's decision and talks with Hezbollah before the decision to enter this confrontation have failed. And to be honest, even after the decision of the government yesterday, Hezbollah has issued a statement refusing the government decision. And as we've seen this morning, Hezbollah is, at least up until now, midday, have announced, put out 3 statements claiming 3 different attacks on Israeli positions. So it doesn't seem to have influence on Hezbollah, not the government, not the political parties, not even the allies in the parliament with Hezbollah. Hezbollah just acting solely on this.
And we need to keep in mind, Hezbollah is not the only Shiite force in Lebanon, also not the only political force in Lebanon. When it comes to Shiites, there's also the Amal movement and Nabi Berri. We know he is very much against that. We also know Shiites themselves, as Mohammed said, also classic supporters of Hezbollah. They're still licking their wounds. They're still very much, not too happy to be dragged into this. But at the same time, one word about the Lebanese government. If the Lebanese government wants to have, Hezbollah has never been weak as it has been in the last year and a half. And still, just to show you how weak the Lebanese government is, that it still doesn't manage to put it, to get it in line or to enforce anything against it, definitely not demilitarization. We need to understand what drives Hezbollah, even though it's a Lebanese force. Their alliance with Iran, with the Shiite movement of, and the commitment of the Iranian Revolution, to what they said, to export the revolution, to spread the revolution. That was, Hezbollah for many years, for many decades, was the most successful example of how the Iranians have managed to do that. And what we're seeing happening in the last 2.5 years is quite an astonishing success, actually, for Israel, that had for many years. And it's also, for Israel, it's also their breaking of the barrier, the psychological barrier of confronting these forces. First, the proxies of Iran, and then directly Iran itself.
Yeah. I'd just like to get one last take from you, Mohammed, before you go, because I know that you're also very busy today and that there is an enormous amount going on. Just to get an idea of where public anger is directed. Is it directed at Israel? Is it directed at Hezbollah? Or is it actually directed at the Lebanese government?
Well, it's directed on all the patterns. I think that basically there's wide criticism of Hezbollah's decision dragging Lebanon into this war. That's definite, even among people who usually support Hezbollah. They haven't been warned about this. They have not recovered from the previous battle with Israel yet. But also the Lebanese, who have spent 20 and 22 hours evacuating their towns in the targeted areas, arriving to Beirut. They are angry also with the government. They say that the government has not set a complete plan to accommodate these people. Some of the schools that the government said are now shelters for these refugees are full. There's no place for these people to go. So they're definitely also angry at their government. And there's always a general sense, a general agreement in Lebanon, a consensus that Israel has never been but an aggressor on Lebanon. That's the general sense. And they also direct always a kind of frustration on the Israelis, especially that Israel is still occupying territory, has not been binding by the ceasefire agreement in 2024. One thing I want to end with, and just commenting on what Shani just said, is very significant. At this stage, Hezbollah has been always sending rockets and drones towards Israel in a very, very limited scale so far. So this is very significant scale. Hezbollah has usually been launching much more strong attacks towards Israel in previous attacks. So that's definitely a sign of how much the militant group had been weakened after the 2024 confrontation with Israel.
But I just want to say, it doesn't matter when it comes to Israel. You hear their briefings; they will attack Israel. They see this chance to bring Hezbollah to its knees. So how strong is the Hezbollah attack? It doesn't matter. Israel's response is going to be very fierce. This is what they're promising. And this is what we're also seeing on the ground. So in that aspect, there is no equation of power. It doesn't matter. The very fact that Hezbollah is still there at this threat, even a small one for Israel, that's a pretense. That's the excuse. That's the ground to execute plans that were actually, in the drawer for quite some time, trying to finally get rid of Hezbollah as a military threat, at least, on the border.
Thank you very much for that, Shani. I'd like to say very big thank you to Mohammed Kreta, who is DW's Beirut Bureau Chief. Thank you very much. Do stay safe there, and we will certainly be checking in with you over the next few hours. Thank you very much again.
Alex, also to our viewers who are watching on YouTube stream, you can send in questions And if we have time, I have a question for Shani from one of our users.
Great, because I'm hoping that we can go to our next guest, but I'm just waiting to find out if he is there. He is there.
Okay.
Do you want to ask a quick question and then we will go to our guest? But a short answer, please, if possible.
Okay, then I have two questions. I think one will have a long answer. I'll ask the one which you can answer short in quickly.
I'll do my best.
So at Hehe96 has asked, which country is more desperate to win, America or Israel?
Well, I think definitely Trump. He's got a lot relying on this, and he needs this to be a success and definitely not to become a very prolonged war. And he will be the one calling the shots. He will decide when this is over and when we move on. As much as he might be influenced by Israel, it's definitely clear who has the final word here.
And that's a very good question, because that's certainly something we can put to our next guest, who is joining us now, I hope. It is Fawaz Gerges, who is Professor of International Relations at the London School of Economics and an expert on the Middle East, and in particular on Iran. We're very delighted that you could join us. Thank you very much. Before we start speaking, I wanted to play a clip from the US President, who was speaking yesterday. He laid out 4 objectives for the US in its campaign. So let's just listen to that and then get your reaction to that.
This was our last best chance to strike what we're doing right now and eliminate the intolerable threats posed by this sick and sinister regime. Our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capabilities, and you see that happening on an hourly basis, and their capacity to produce brand new ones, and pretty good ones they make. Second, we're annihilating their navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders.
So, Professor, that was Donald Trump there laying out the objectives that the US has in this war with Iran. They do seem to be a little bit different from what he'd originally said, which was it was all about regime change, but now it seems to be all about focusing on knocking out the military, also the navy, and also ensuring that Iran does not have nuclear weapons. Is that realistic for the US?
First of all, I think President Trump has finally come out and told the American people and the world his strategic and tactical objectives, because he had not told the American people and the world why he decided to attack Iran, while Iran and the United States were basically negotiating a way out of the nuclear program. This is point one. So finally, we know what the Trump administration and the military political establishment in the United States, the overarching military objectives. The second point, if you compare the statement yesterday with his 8-minute speech on the day that the United States attacked Iran, you see a major shift. His overarching aim initially was to bring about regime change in Iran, and he called on the Iranian people to rise up against the government, because in his word, that was a golden opportunity for the Iranian people to basically take charge of their own governments. I think the broader picture is the following at this particular moment. The question on the table is not whether the United States and Israel could really deliver major devastating attacks on Iran, whether you're talking about the ballistic missiles or whether about the security infrastructure or the leadership. We have seen it before in June last year and this year. The question is, to what extent will the United States be able to change the behavior, the conduct of the Iranian government? To what extent will the United States be able to force Iran to submit to its demands? To what extent will the United States be able to basically avoid the high costs, economic, social, and political and security costs in the Gulf? What we have seen in the past 3 days is that the economic and political and security costs have increased multifold. What Iran's strategy is basically to bring the temple down on everyone's head, including its own head. The war is no longer really America and Israel wars against Iran. Now, it's a region-wide war. The United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Lebanon, the Houthis will most likely join the war in the next few hours or next few days. And we know that the economic costs are being felt in the heart of Europe and in terms of waterways. So the question is, it's not what the United States wants and what can the United States do. We have to take into account what can Iran do and how will Iran respond to America's goals. And the final question on this for your own viewers, the question again on the table is that who will blink first? Who has greater stamina and resilience and patience to basically stay the course? The Iranian leadership is counting that President Trump does not have the patience, does not have the stamina. His domestic situation is extremely fragile. Midterm elections are coming very soon. And only 21%, remember, 21% of Americans support Trump's war of choice. While in 2003, when George W. Bush attacked Iraq, 71% of Americans supported President Bush war against Iraq, 21%. So all in all, I think we have to wait and see, because it's just the beginning. And we have to see, when and if the dust settles on the battlefield, not just only in Iran, but in the neighborhood and beyond.
Yeah, so there's a huge amount to unpack in that, in what you've said, and the fact that this whole conflict is becoming wider by the day. You talked there about the pressure that Donald Trump is under in terms of the amount of time he can dedicate to this war, and that was something else that he talked about last night. Let's just listen to him talking about how long he believes the US will be involved in this conflict.
We have the strongest and most powerful by far military in the world, and we will easily prevail. We're already substantially ahead of our time projections, but whatever the time is, it's okay. Whatever it takes, we will always, and we have right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that. We'll do it.
So he's talking about 4 to 5 weeks. Is that realistic, given what we have just said in the lead up to that?
Again, I feel very obliged as a historian to always caution our viewers, is that it's essential not to take Donald Trump's words for granted. He's unpredictable, he's temperamental. He says one thing and changes his mind. A day before he made that statement, he floated the idea of talking to Iran again with the Atlantic magazine in the United States. I don't think Donald Trump can stay this war for several weeks, given the rising economic and social and political goals. Iran is being devastated. Iran is being hurt. Iran is the leadership, the infrastructure. But the question is, who will have really the ability to absorb pain? My take on it is that the pressure is building up in the United States, the domestic pressure, not just by Democrats, by the way, independents, and even his own base of support, the MAGA movement, is very angry at President Trump because he supposedly came on the platform, the president of peace. He was against the forever wars by his predecessors, and now he is basically triggered one of the largest and one of the most dangerous region-wide conflict in the region. So we have to wait and see. We have some information, credible information, that the United Arab Emirates and Qatar and other countries in the region will try to plead with President Trump to have a ramp off, to really basically bring this war to a closer end. Because again, the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, are being hurt a great deal. The Strait of Hormuz now is a no-go, where 20%, 25% of oil and gas sources really is transported through the Strait of Hormuz. So all in all, I think the next few days will be very critical in the sense of whether we will see an end to this particular extremely dangerous war, or basically this could last 4 months. I mean, remember, Israel's war in Gaza, when it started, many specialists and strategists thought it would take 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. It lasted more than 2 years and still continuing. So this has the potential, truly. What's happening in Iran has the potential to be devastating to the entire regions for many years to come, regardless of the political and geostrategic outcomes of this particular war.
Professor Shani Rosanes here in the studio. You were talking about stamina. I agree with you. Both sides are playing for time. It's a crucial element here. You're talking about the domestic front for Trump. What about the Iranians, the domestic front inside, the fear of protest and further destabilization of the regime that might also be, pacing the time of the Iranians?
Well, I think we know several things about Iran. There is so much we do not know. We are speculating, as you know, most of us. We have become talking head when we talk about Iran. Iran is fragile, Iran is vulnerable, this is the most significant dangerous point for Iran. We know several things historically. Iran is not a banana republic. Iran is a civilization. This is not a state. It's not really Sykes-Picot. People in Iran, when they come under attack, they rally around the flag. This is real. You have more than 90 million people. Iranians are very patriotic people. We also know there's a significant popular opposition to the repressive regime in Tehran. We have seen it since 2009 and the latest wave just a couple of weeks ago. But also there's a significant popular segment that support the Islamic Republic. My take on it that the Iranian regime now faces an existential crisis. For the Iranian leadership, this is it. They are basically fighting a war for their very existence. They will stop at nothing, in order to survive, in order to really resist, in order to show the world that basically they will never submit to American demands. And my fear is that if any protest takes place in Iran, as President Trump called on the Iranian people to do so, this could become a massive massacre. So all in all, it seems to me the Iranian leadership basically hunkered down, and they're fighting for their own survival, and they'll do whatever it takes in order to survive in the next few weeks and next few months.
Professor Fawaz, this is Binish here, and I have a question from one of our users, actually. And the user, one of our users, Mr. Sylvester Law, is asking, will Israel send in ground troops to Iran?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Will Israel send in ground troops to Iran? And that can also be a larger question because we know...
Also because of the US, we've talked about that. That's
US,
a possibility.
Donald Trump has also signaled.
You know, when I read the reports about the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and his calls to President Trump and urged him to attack Iran, I was really shocked. I was really very surprised because our understanding, that all the Gulf states pleaded with President Trump in order to not to attack Iran, to focus on the diplomatic path, the diplomatic course. We know for sure that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu played a major role in convincing Donald Trump last June and now in basically attacking Iran, because Benjamin Netanyahu made it very clear that Iran is vulnerable, Iran is down, Iran on its knees. This is the moment to deliver a fatal blow. But the fact that, according to the Washington Post, that the Saudi Crown Prince called President Trump and urged him to attack Iran, this really came as a shock because the Iranian leadership made it very clear any attack by the United States and Israel will be an attack on its very survival, that they would basically go all the way. They will attack all American bases in the Gulf and also attack the very sources, the political economy and oil and gas. So the reality is, Saudi sources denied the report, but multiple sources in the United States confirmed that basically the Saudis, including the defense minister, the Saudi defense minister, the brother of the crown prince, when he visited Washington, he also basically leaked information that he basically told the Americans to attack Iran, because if they don't attack Iran, this would really basically embolden the Iranian government. But the reality now, regardless of what happened, the reality now, the Gulf states are hurting the most. Iran first and the Gulf state, and probably they would like to see an end to this war before the devastation become greater in the next few hours and next few days and next few weeks.
So you're not seeing any presence of ground troops, U.S. ground troops, or the Israeli troops in Iran?
Well, I believe that the most powerful, the most influential person in Donald Trump's decision to attack Iran was Benjamin Netanyahu. This is for sure. That is, in fact, we have now confirmed sources, credible sources, by the New York Times and other newspapers, that Benjamin Netanyahu was able to convince Donald Trump, this will be easy, this will be simple, this will be clean, this will not be costly. And President Trump, all we know about him, he wants basically to declare a win. He thought that after he arrested and kidnapped the Venezuelan president, he became really very much involved, and he believed that he could do the same thing in Iran. He also believed that once the supreme leader is killed, the Iranian regime could collapse like a house of glass. And that's why it seems to me that President Trump has been really climbing down the tree in the past 40 hours or so, because the death the supreme leader did not really bring about the collapse of the Iranian regime, as President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu had predicted.
Did you want to say something?
No, I just want to say we have been hearing reports from Saudi sources that there was some special Israeli forces on the ground in Iran overnight. There's still a big difference between a massive deployment and special units that are going inside. But just to add to what the professor said, I mean, you know, I think Eisenhower said once, plans are worthless and planning is everything, you know, in the sense that there is good reason to believe that Israel and the U.S. with their CIA and the Mossad are planning the second phase of what happens next. We are also seeing that the attacks are focusing on breaking down the internal police of the besieged of the regime, trying to weaken the regime and the supporting oppressive powers that it has. But then at the same time, it is quite limited to what you can do without boots on the ground. In a way, it seems like the strategy of the U.S. and the Israel is to have civilians from Iran, that are opposing the government, to be those boots on the ground. But I have to say, from what I'm hearing, you cannot exclude this, this option altogether. Definitely when it comes to special units and some maybe very limited deployment and very strategic deployment, maybe in a Venezuela model that is trying to take, specific people out in order to, allow reform or change. But we're still in the thick of it. It's very hard to say. We need to be very careful with speculations.
Professor, I just want to ask you one last question before you go, and if you could just answer briefly, if possible. We know that you've just said that the Iranian leadership is facing an existential crisis, and we've talked about the problems in the country, as well as obviously what is going on militarily with the US and also Israel. But how much of a serious threat do you think Iran is still to the US and to Israel, with the fact that they are targeting these military bases of the US all across the region?
I think I know the narrative, the dominant narrative in the West, including in Germany, is that Iran represents a strategic threat to Israel and the United States and the West. The dominant narrative is that Iran is a terrorist-led state. Iran is dangerous. The reality is, in the past few years, Iran really has been on the defensive as opposed on the offensive. In fact, Israel now strategy is offensive continuously, whether in Lebanon and Syria and the West Bank and Gaza against Iran. The Iranians really went out of their way to make painful concessions to the United States to reach a nuclear deal. Because, as you said, Iran faces an existential crisis. It's pressed between a rock. major popular opposition, and also the fear of an external war. This is, I keep really, we have to remind our audience, for the sake of a balanced reporting, that this is a war of choice. This is Donald Trump's war and Benjamin Netanyahu. This is an illegal war. It took place, like in June last year, while the Iranians were negotiating and offering concessions, as the Omani foreign minister made it very clear. Don't please misunderstand me. This is a repressive regime. The Iranian regime is not my cup of tea, but there's a big difference between saying that Iran is repressive and basically declaring unilateral preemptive war against Iran.
Thank you so much for joining us. I will have to stop you there because we are running out of time, but we very much appreciate you being with us and look forward to speaking to you again very soon as this continues. So just to remind all our viewers, we have been talking yet again about this war that is going on in Iran. We're on the 4th day of that after Israel and the US attacked it. And we will have another live stream in the next 2 hours. Thank you for joining us.